Coming up in this week's Torah Pearls.
What does the Bible mean when it says that a soul is cut off or cut off from his people?
Aaron makes a golden calf, but the people say, "These are your gods, O Israel." Why in the plural?
Did Moses have horns?
Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, where are their descendants?
Was Aaron introduced to the story in the Pentateuch during the time of Josiah?
The 39 prohibitions of Shabbat, where does that come from?
All right, Jono, let's jump into this thing.
Let's do it. G'day, dear viewers, and thank you for your company once again here on truth2u.org. That's truth, number 2, letter U.org. I'm Jono Vandor, and joining me from the Horeb Institute in Louisiana is the author of the Moses Scroll, Ross Nichols. G'day, mate.
Hello, Jono. How are you, my friend?
Well, apparently, Ross, the flu that you had a week ago was so contagious that I managed to catch it online. So it's my turn now.
We spend a lot of time together over the microphone. I don't know. Maybe there's something there.
I'm telling you, okay.
But we want everyone to reach their hand toward the screen, pray healing for Jono.
Yeah,
Jono, let's do. That ought to do it. You ought to be good to go now.
It is time for Season 3 of Torah Pearls, brought to you by Tanakh Tours, TanakhTours.com, TANAKH.com, TanakhTours.com. We are going back to Egypt, Jordan, Israel this November, and there is still room on the bus. Go to the website, put your deposit down, and you'll be spending, 4 weeks with us, Ross,
what a beautiful
in the
time.
Holy Land. It is going to be exciting. This week,
and we need them.
Yep.
Wait. We need them to do it so we can count them. We're going to do a census, right? This is a perfect lead-in.
We're doing a census, and we need 50 shekels. 50 shekels.
That's right.
This week we are in Torah portion Ki Tissa. That's where we are. And joining us is our AI critical scholar Ezra. Ezra, kick us off with a summary of the more controversial highlights from the perspective of critical scholarship.
Ki Tissa is packed with drama, tension, and theological controversy. From a critical academic perspective, the portion is a composite of multiple sources, with clear signs of editorial layering and theological debates embedded within the text. One of the most controversial moments is the golden calf incident. The people, impatient for Moses' return, pressure Aaron into creating an idol. This raises serious historical and textual questions. Why would Aaron, later portrayed as the high priest, participate in idolatry? Many scholars suggest this story reflects a polemic against northern Israelite worship, particularly the golden calves at Bethel and Dan. The text seems to be an editorial effort to discredit northern religious practices by linking them to a moment of national shame. Moses' smashing of the tablets is another striking moment. It's often read as an act of righteous indignation, but it also suggests a break in the covenant itself. Some scholars argue that this reflects an early tradition where Israel's relationship with Yahweh was not yet firmly codified. The divine revelation to Moses, where Yahweh proclaims his attributes, also appears to be a later theological insertion, shaping a more compassionate and forgiving deity, in contrast to the wrathful God seen earlier in the text. And then there's the command for Moses to see God's back, but not his face, a moment that seems to preserve an ancient struggle over anthropomorphic depictions of the divine. Some suggest this passage reflects a transition from early Israelite religion, where Yahweh was more physically present, to a later, more abstract theology. Ki Tissa isn't just about covenant and rebellion. It's a text that reveals the tensions between different Israelite traditions, theological evolutions, and the shaping of religious identity over time.
Whoa, baby.
It really is. Oh, my goodness, Ross. There's so much in this Torah portion. It's going to be a struggle to fit it all in. But I do agree with a lot of what Ezra just said. I think that's an excellent summary. But we have the advantage, of course, the benefit of having the Moses Scroll. And, of course, this season of Torah Pearls is through not only the critical scholarship perspective, but with the Moses Scroll in mind. And it just so happens, as you know, this Torah portion overlaps considerably.
Yeah, it does. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Now, one thing I was going to say is we have tons to get through. So some of the things in my notes, Jono, even though, like I kept thinking, wow, we could talk for 10, 15 minutes on each of these topics. But some of these things we may just have to do rapid fire, and people are going to have to take notes and go look at it on their own to some degree, I think.
I think that's what's going to happen, but we're going to have to really dig deep on the The golden calf, for example.
Oh,
because
yeah.
The golden calf does appear in the Moses scroll and a number of other things as well. So we're going to rip through this, and it begins, Ross, in chapter 30, verses 11 and 12. And it says, The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when you take a census of the people of Israel according to their enrollment, each shall pay the Lord a ransom, Ross, for himself, on being enrolled, that no plague may come upon them through their being enrolled. And this is what verse 13 is, what everyone who is enrolled is in the records, they shall pay half a shekel by the sanctuary weight. We're going to talk
That's
about
not a bad price. That's not a bad price to avoid a plague,
right?
though. No, I mean, really.
Half a shekel as an offering to the Lord. Now, Ross, a ransom. If we go to, and we've already touched on this, we did this already, chapter 21, verse 30. If you want to know what a ransom is.
What is it?
Well, we went into detail when we were discussing this particular. Let me find it here. 21:30.
While you're looking for it, let me just say that Ki Tissa, the name of the Torah portion, means literally when you lift. So it's when you lift the head. It's like you're counting, and you go, all right, everybody lift your heads up. Okay, there you go, in the back. That's right. Tall people in the back, short people in the front. You're counting heads. Go ahead. Did you find it? You ready?
Here it is. I'm going to start at 29. This is 21:29 in Exodus. If, however, the ox has been in the habit of gorging, Ross, and its owner, though warned, has failed to guard it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner too shall be put to death, Ross. But it says, verse 30, if ransom is laid upon him, he must pay whatever is laid upon him to redeem his life. So it's an amount of money in exchange for your life, basically.
And who wouldn't cough up the cash?
Right, because what God is saying here, what God is saying, what Jehovah is saying in this, and remind me, this is a priestly text where we are, right? Who is the source here, Ross?
What's the text? I don't have. What is the
chapter 30, verse 11 and 13?
Yeah, sorry, that is going to be in land. Let's see. I've got to go back. Let me see where it shows. Man, Jono, I tell you.
The Lord spoke to Moses saying, it basically, let me just paraphrase. Take 50 shekels from everybody, regardless of whether they're poor or they're rich. 50 shekels. Is it a 50 shekel or is it half a shekel? Hang on, what's going on here? Half shekel. Half a shekel by the sanctuary weight, sorry. From everybody, Ross. From everyone. And if they don't, and they got to pay it as a ransom for their life, because if they don't, I'm going to drop a plague on them, Ross.
Hey,
I'm going to drop a plague on them.
Right.
They're going to die. They better cough up the money, because if they don't, plague, death, and there's no two ways about it.
Jono, it took me just a minute because in the Torah tablet, the last indication was plenty of chapters back. In fact, it was all the way back in chapter 20, right before the beginning of Mishpatim, and it's E. So we're in E all the way through this section. So that's why it took me a minute to find it. Okay?
Is
now,
that right?
You mentioned plague. Let me just say, this whole thing about the people getting hit with a plague, if it's tied to this this census, it reminded me of 2 Samuel 24 and 1 Chronicles 21. We don't have to go there, but it reminded me of the story where David also is doing a census and something goes wrong and it brings out this plague, right?
Yeah, so that's such a bizarre story. We did a program on that, I don't know, some months ago. And as it turns out, it was an example of where David prays to have his sin passed on. And I think it was the sin of taking a census, right? Was that this sin? And he realized that and we don't know why, it's apparently a sin. We don't know why. But for whatever reason, it is a sin. And then he says, well, tell you what, sorry about that. Please don't punish me. Just pass it on to someone else, the punishment on someone else. And apparently, if I remember correctly, I think 70,000 Israelites died, or so the story goes.
Man.
And it goes on and on and on until David says, tell you what if I build an altar up on this plot of land here, and will that appease you, and God says, yeah, I'm going to tell the angel to stop killing people now. And that's where we get the Temple Mount. That's the story of the Temple Mount, people. That's how that starts.
Yeah. Now, look, speaking of this particular story, this bizarre story, again, if you look at 2 Chronicles 24 and 1 Chronicles 21, this is one of those that I like to do horizontal readings, Jono, where you compare them side by side, like one would do with the Synoptic Gospels. But listen to what this note says. This is a note from the Jewish Study Bible, 1 Chronicles 21. And it says, I'm just going to read this opening just to give people this kind of a shock to encourage them to go study it. The differences between Chronicles version and 2 Samuel 24 are numerous and substantive, leading to divergent views regarding the textual history of both passages. Chronicles shares many features with 4Q Sam A, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls from Qumran, yet still differs from it in fundamental respects. And then it goes on and it starts lining out many, many, many differences between these two texts. So when people, a lot of times, the story that they know of how it led to the Temple Mount's acquisition and so forth, it might be from 1 Chronicles or it might be from 2 Samuel. But I encourage people to go study these, and we could do a whole show just on the differences between these two. That note is fantastic, by the way, as many of them are in the Jewish Study Bible.
Really interesting. So that's on, what's that, page 1750?
51. Yep.
51, yeah. I missed that, so I'm going to read that a little bit later. Good deal. So what is, so this is a little bit different, Ross, to chapter 25, verses 1 and 2, where God says to Moses, hey, come on, just tell the people to bring me gifts. You know, Jehovah says, tell them to bring me some of that candy, and that'll be good. Oh, if they want to, if their heart so moves them, you know, bring it. But here it's like, y'all give me some money, everyone, regardless of whether you're going to kill you if you don't.
Classes on this because I had a beautiful theory, more of a fundamentalist view, and that is that you don't pay more if you're wealthy, you can't pay less if you're poor. Everyone pays the same amount, which the spiritual lesson, if you're a fundamentalist, is all souls are equal. You know, it doesn't matter if it doesn't matter if you're 6'4", if you're 4'6". It doesn't matter because God looks at the individual on the inside, not on the outside. Everyone pays the same. But by the way, Jono, I was going to ask you, it's an atonement for your soul. What does that mean? Do you know? I mean,
but that's my point. I mean, because really, there's no two ways about it. If you are paying a ransom, otherwise God is going to hit you with a plague, then you are ransoming your life. Here's half a shekel for my life. If I don't give it to you, you're going to kill me. There's no two ways about it. This is what he is saying to them. So you're going to cough it up.
Yeah, that's right. And by the way, like I said, it's not a bad deal. Half a shekel, you know, for your life. You know, if you want to save your life. So let me ask you this. The other thing about the shekel, and by the way, this is the Torah portion that is read on a special Sabbath known as Shabbat Shekalim. In the Hebrew tradition, it reminds me of my old friend. I don't know if you ever met him. He has since passed, but it was Reuven Prager. And Reuven was a Levite. And he did he had an organization called Beged Ivri, but every year he would put out one of these half shekels and worked with the Temple Institute and various other people. But it reminded me every time I get to this Torah portion, I think of Reuven.
I do remember him.
Now the shekel of the sanctuary, that phrase appears in this Torah portion. You may have something on this, but I was just going to say that it appears 25 times in 25 verses. The Hebrew, b'shekel hakodesh, the shekel of the sanctuary, 5 times in Exodus. Leviticus has it 3 times. Numbers has it 17 times, and 16 of those are in Numbers chapter 7. And guess what? None in Deuteronomy. It never appears in Deuteronomy.
And it doesn't appear in the Moses Scroll, of course.
That's right.
Yeah, that's interesting because it is obviously speaking of an already existing currency, like a recognized currency here, and this is how much you will give. But we're not there yet. So
that's right.
Now, I'm jumping to 31. Was there anything else you wanted to highlight?
Well, yeah, man. We got, hang on. There's a whole list that we don't have to go into detail, but people can read in chapter 30, verse 25 through 33 is a list of anointed people and things. I would call this a messianic section. This thing is packed with messiahs from a Hebrew Bible perspective. But let me ask you this, and this is important. I just wanted to touch on verse 33 of chapter 30 is the first occurrence of the phrase cut off. Now, we're familiar with this in the Hebrew Bible. Over and over, we see it it'll say something like, he will be cut off from his people, or that soul. You do this, that soul will be cut off from your people. And I wanted to make sure that people don't have this wrong. Sometimes people think that means you're just excommunicated or kind of kicked out of the club. But I want to read 2 verses and let the Bible define what it means to be cut off. So look at Exodus 31, and we're going to go to verse 14 and 15, Exodus 30, and I think this is something that pretty much makes it clear. Exodus 31, I'll get there in a moment.
14 and 15. You shall keep the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. He who profanes it shall be put to death, Ross. Whoever does any work on it, the person shall be cut off from among his kin.
Right.
6 days, 6 days you shall, but whoever does work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death.
There you go.
Cut off and put to death is synonymous.
Yeah. Now, one more text just to make sure. We have to have 2 witnesses, Jono, according to the priestly writer. Leviticus chapter 20, verses 1 through 6. Here we go. And the Lord spoke to Moses, say further to the Israelite people, anyone among the Israelites or among strangers residing in Israel who gives any of his offspring to Molech shall be put to death, as he should be, by the way. The people of the land shall pelt him with stones, and I will set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his people, because he gave his offspring to Molech and so defiled my sanctuary and profaned my holy name. And if the people of the land should shut their eyes to that man when he gives off his offspring to Molech and should not put him to death, I myself will set my face against that man and his kin, and I will cut off from among their people both him and all who follow him in going astray after Molech. And if any person turns to ghosts or familiar spirits and goes astray after them, I'll set my face against that person and cut him off from among his people. Jono, cutting off a person means to cut him off from the land of the living. That means you're dead. Now, here's another thing. It appears dozens and dozens of times in the Hebrew Bible, but it never, Jono Vandor, appears in Deuteronomy.
Never, ever.
Never, ever. It doesn't appear.
The Lord spoke to... Is there anything else, or I jump to 31?
31's good. Let's talk about your boys.
Bezalel. Now, I want you to unpack this, okay? So Moses, Jehovah spoke to Moses. See, I have singled them out by name. Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, Ben-Hur, there you go, of the tribe of Judah. I have endowed him with a divine spirit of skill, ability, and knowledge of every kind of craft, to make designs for the work of gold, silver, copper, to cut stones for setting, and to carve wood, to work in every kind of craft. Moreover, Ross, I have assigned to him Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, and I have also granted skill to all those who are skillful, that they may make everything that I have commanded you, the tent of meeting, the ark of the pact, and to cover upon it, all the furnishings of the tent, the table and utensils, and everything, Ross, just everything, and all the beautiful things for Aaron to wear, and so on and so forth. Go for it.
Beautiful, beautiful priestly passage, isn't it? This is not only priestly passage. This is not only a priestly passage, but it is also wisdom literature. It ties to a passage in Proverbs. You were a Christian at one time, Jono, so I can ask you this. You ever hear the phrase, the fruits of the Spirit? the fruits of the Spirit, the things that the Spirit brings forth. If you got the Spirit, you're going to have these fruits. But a lot of people don't know that there are, according to wisdom priestly writers or priestly writers writing wisdom texts, there are roots of the Spirit, meaning if you look particularly from the time that we start this journey through the tabernacle and the building of the tabernacle and these Spirit-filled artisans, you're going to see wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. You know, you have the Chokhmah, Binah, and Da'at. And one thing I wanted to do is show that this is connected to creative power, not only in the priestly realm, but in the heavenly realm. Proverbs 3:19, the Lord founded the earth by wisdom. He established the heavens by understanding, and by his knowledge the depths burst apart and the skies distilled dew. So even the creation of the world, according to priestly pen, is something which is connected to the roots of the Spirit, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And we're going to see this over and over in the priestly literature, particularly around the building of the tabernacle. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Now, speaking of the building of the tabernacle, and now that we're in chapter 31, let's see, I'm going to go from 12. And the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelite people and say, and I've got here in the Jewish Study Bible, nevertheless. And this is our key word. Nevertheless, you must keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout all the ages, that you may know that I, the Lord, created you. Consecrated you, have consecrated you, sorry.
Yeah.
You shall keep my Sabbath, and if you don't do it, then you're going to be put to death. Right. All right. The word is nevertheless. What do you got in your Torah tablet?
What verse? 31 what?
31:13. 31:13.
Okay, 13 has the following. Let's see. Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, verily ye shall keep my Sabbath, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations.
Yes, verily. Okay. And I think Richard Elliott Freeman's translation has notwithstanding. And the word in Hebrew is ach, which is understood to act in contrast, right? And it is from this word that we get, as described in Mishnah Shabbat 7:2, the 39 prohibitions of Shabbat, right? So in the high demand religious institution of Judaism, Ross, there is 39. People can look those up. I'm not going to go through it. Suffice to say that you can't comb your hair. But what it is you can't. And you go back and see all of the types of work that was done to produce the tabernacle. However, or nevertheless, or verily, you shall keep my Sabbath. So what the rabbis do is they look at that and they go, okay, so everything before this is work. Let's just write it. Oh, there's 39 different types of work.
39 verbs, by the way. There are 39 verbs mentioned in that description of the. Yeah,
that's the way it works.
Building. That's right.
Very
39.
And then, and so as you point out, right, we have in 31:14 to 15 that there's a death penalty for working on Shabbat, right? Rather than a complete rest, right? Whereas in the Moses scroll, it says, sanctify the seventh day. 6 days I made the heavens and the earth, and all that is in them, and I ceased on the seventh day. Therefore you shall cease, also you and your animal, and all that is yours. I am Elohim, your God. And then in 31:17 it says, ceased and was refreshed. God ceased and was refreshed, it adds. It was refreshed, as if he rested and now he feels better because he's had a rest. Excuse me. We don't have any of that in the Moses scroll, obviously, the idea of resting. And every now and then, as it appears here, we have the idea of ceasing, which is derived from the Moses scroll. But the idea is that you cease from your work. The demand of Judaism is that you cease from their work. So it's different, you see. It's the difference between a personal liberation, and and a high demand religion. So it's imposing upon you that you must cease from doing everything that they did, as opposed from you ceasing from your weekly occupation, Ross.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think, and a lot of people have made a lot about this. Think of all the religious rules about Shabbat throughout the generations. Like you pointed out, it gets so almost a burden to cease. Like it's really...
It's like, maybe take a couple of Valium, pass out for the day, just to make sure that you keep it perfectly. Because you just may as well go into a coma to be the holiest that you can be, lest you accidentally carry something outside or like I said, brush your hair or something like that, or your teeth.
And without going into a lot of the silly details, we see in the Dead Sea Scrolls very, very strict adherence to defining work, right? And so some people might remember or know, if they're Christian, this idea that which of you, if an animal fell into a hole, you wouldn't go get it. Well, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they say that specifically. That's his audience at the time. Right. If your goat I'm paraphrasing, but if your goat falls in a hole on Friday night, or however you determine the Sabbath, just leave it there until Shabbat is over, and then go get the goat. Yeah. So quite really, right. It's crazy. Yeah.
It is. It's again, as James would say, it's a high demand religion, and if you want to adhere to that, by all means. But there's Absolutely. 39. If you want to do it properly, there are 39 prohibitions that you've got to stick to, and you should do them all, not just a few.
That's right.
Chapter 31, verse 18, Ross. Finally, and we touched on this, but oh my goodness, it's just been so long. Moses finally gets the 2 tablets. And it says, written by the finger of God. I have a note here. What are your thoughts on that? Because I have a note to check Richard Elliott Freeman on that. Your thoughts?
Well, I tell you, it is, first of all, it's an amazing, when you read this, it ought to push you back in your chair. If God wrote on 2 tablets of stone, and we have this in the Moses scroll as well, what does that mean? What does that look like?
I'm telling you, that is one of the most infuriating things.
A finger?
It's one of the most infuriating things for me that Moses just did not go into detail there.
What do you mean? Inquiring minds want to know.
What do you mean he wrote it on the 2 tablets? How Moses?
Did you not see? Did you not see Cecil B. DeMille?
Oh, where it's I'd love to think that it was with the lightning. I love that. I'd love to think that that's how it was done, but perhaps it wasn't. But the interesting thing is that as I often say, all the anthropomorphic references, the finger of God, you can see my back, you can't look upon my face, or you can look upon my face. We're going to be talking about that. All of, mighty arm outstretched, mighty hand outstretched arm, all of this sort of, he came down and all this sort of stuff. That's all missing from the Moses scroll. We don't have any of that. So how exactly?
I don't know, but let's do one more verse about the same thing. It's in this Torah portion, but you can't read 31:18 without going to 32 verse 15 and 16. Can we do that now?
We can. Let me just read this. Okay. Richard Elliott Freeman says the phrase "finger of God" occurs in another P passage, Exodus chapter 8, verse 15, but never in J or in E. The reference to the testimony is also characteristic of P. Further, the mountain is referred to as Sinai, which occurs only in P and never J. Only in P and J, never in E or D. This passage connects to the next P passage, which is Exodus chapter 34:29. We'll be there soon enough. Your thoughts, Ross? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just because it's the same basic text, right? 32, 15, and 16. And Moses turned and went down from the mount with the 2 tables of the testimony in his hand, tables that were written on both their sides, Jono. On the one side and on the other they were written. And the tables were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved upon the tables. Now, I just wanted to bring that up. And the other thing that I would also note is that, if people don't necessarily line up or accept the whole documentary hypothesis, here's another way to look at it. The tables the two tables of the testimony, that's only in priestly literature. You never see the tablets of the testimony or any of that testimony talk in Deuteronomy or the Moses scroll. There, it's always called the tables or the tablets of the covenant. And I think that that's significant. The testimony is it's a priestly description of the covenant. So that's got to be brought in. But I'm like you. I don't know what this looks like. I like to imagine that it was some fancy, the rock,
the
pieces
lightning?
of rock flying with the lightning hitting it. Yeah.
Love it. So this is what Moses writes in the Moses scroll. At Horeb on the day that I went up to the mountain to receive the 2 stone tablets, and upon them was written all the words that Elohim spoke with you in the mountain. So it doesn't actually say it there. It says that on them were written the words that Elohim spoke. He continues, from the midst of the fire on the day of the assembly, you made a molten calf for yourselves and angered Elohim. And I fell down before Elohim in the mountain burning with fire, and the 2 tablets were in my hand. And I saw your sin, and I shattered the 2 tablets before your eyes. And I interceded on your account at that time 40 days and 40 nights. And we'll talk about this verse in a minute. This pops up in 9:22 of Deuteronomy. It goes on to say, at that time Elohim said to me, carve 2 stone tablets for yourselves, like the first ones, and ascend the mount to me. And I ascended the mount, and the 2 tablets were in my hand. And here it is. And Elohim wrote on the tablets the 10 words which he spoke to you in the mount on the day of assembly, and he gave them to me. And behold them, they are in the chest that I made. And that's all we have. And it is the 2 things that strike me about this, Ross, is that very little is spoken. That is all that is mentioned about the golden calf, number 1. Number 2, that is all that's mentioned about how God wrote them on 2 tablets and gave them to Moses. I'd love to know how that looks. Okay, let's keep going.
I tell you. No, I mean, this is a fantastic lead-in, because if you think about it, a couple of things jump out at me. One, where it's describing the ark. Obviously, this aligns more closely with Deuteronomy chapter 10. Deuteronomy 10 is what we find very close. 9 and 10 in Deuteronomy look a lot more like what we see in the Moses scroll, although there are some additions, which we're going to talk about. But I will say this. One of the things that's striking is when you first look at this, there's something missing in the Moses scroll that is in Exodus and Deuteronomy. And it's a person, and it's a priest, and his name is Aaron. And he doesn't appear in the Moses scroll version of this. But if you look at the source in Exodus 32, Aaron is a bad boy. I mean, literally bad. Like
that's right. In 32 he is, and it oscillates between Aaron being the holiest of the holies, and the high priest, and very, very good, and the spokesman of Moses, and the prophet to Moses, and all of these things. And then also the instigator of a pretty serious idolatry. So
I mean, he's the one taking. Yeah, he's taking the earrings from men and women, and and using those to. Remember, I think I always think it's funny when Moses later asked him in Deuteronomy, we're going to get to that. Hey, what happened here? And he said, look, you're not going to believe this, Moses. I took a few earrings, I threw them into the fire, and out popped this cow. Yeah. That should almost make people chuckle, but people are too scared to laugh. They think it's some kind of grave sin. But look at this. Here's something that I wanted to show. If you read the story of, and I encourage people, line them up side by side. Put Exodus 32 in your left-hand column, Deuteronomy 9 and 10 in the right-hand column. Look at the story. You should also have a Moses scroll column to show the differences. But here's the thing. Listen to this. In Deuteronomy 9, verse 17, and I just want to start here. Actually, 15 is where he starts down the mountain. He's got the 2 tablets of the covenant. Notice, not testimony, in my hands. And I saw how you had sinned against the Lord your God. You had made for yourself a molten calf. You'd been quick to stray from the path that the Lord had enjoined upon you. Therefore I gripped the 2 tablets, flung them away with both my hands, smashing them before your eyes. Threw myself down before the Lord, eating no bread, drinking no water, 40 days, 40 nights, as before, because of the great wrong you had committed, doing what displeased the Lord and vexing him. For I was in dread of the Lord's fierce anger against you, which moved him to wipe you out. And that time, too, the Lord gave heed to me. As for that sinful thing that you had made, the calf, I took it and put it in the fire, broke it to bits, ground it thoroughly. Okay, now I skipped one verse, Jono. The verse that I skipped is in the JPS is indicated with hyphens. And it says,
I got it.
At that time, the Lord gave heed to me. Moreover, the Lord was angry enough with Aaron to have destroyed him. So I also interceded for Aaron at that time. And then it picks back up. What is this talking about? This is an interpolation. It indicates to me that Aaron was not part of this story in Deuteronomy until later, and it's inserted in. Or better stated, the text behind Deuteronomy didn't have Aaron, but it had to be inserted when that earlier text was written, combined with a later idea. So let's say this. Deuteronomy is, I believe, a combination of an authentic document that was discovered in the days of Josiah. And when that document was discovered, it had this story that we're reading, almost, a little bit earlier version of it, but it didn't mention Aaron. But if you're the editor of this newly released book that's coming out, you've got to add something about Aaron because the people may have heard the priestly account in Exodus 32. So I think Aaron is added, and I'm going to give more proof of that in a little bit. I'm going to just...
Well, there's a number of proofs. And the question becomes, Ross, is Aaron... There's a number of questions. Here it is. Is Aaron added? If so, when? That's one question that you've just asked. The other question is, we have two similar golden calf stories. Which one came first? It chronologically wants to be Aaron, the story of Aaron, which is the same story of Deuteronomy, which is the same story of the Moses scroll, right? That's what it wants to be. And from there, Jeroboam decided that it'd be a good idea to copy that, and then his story comes many centuries later. But is that true? And most scholars, Ross, say that not only is Aaron late, but the story of Jeroboam has considerable anthropomorphic references, and that the story of Jeroboam is quite late, but the story of Aaron is later. So they would have the golden calf story of Jeroboam late but first. But what we have is the Moses scroll. And again, the Moses scroll makes a very, very short reference to a moment of idolatry that the people of Israel had. And from there, it seems the question then becomes, well, if the golden calf story of Jeroboam came first, did he choose the golden calf image as sort of or did the writer of the narrative of Jeroboam choose this image as sort of to make it look like Jeroboam was giving Judah the middle finger, so to speak, like, oh yeah, we're going to have a golden calf, and what are you going to do about that? Or Ross, was it just chosen because a calf is a symbol of strength, and it's not an unusual, it's a common symbol of strength. In fact, we even have 12 brazen bulls in the temple, in Solomon's temple, holding up the basin,
Hey, you know what? I don't want to totally jump in and trash your role here, but I'm going to ask Ezra this very thing. I want to bring Ezra in at whenever you get ready. Let's ask Ezra to tell a little bit about this scholarly academic connection between Exodus 32, 1 Kings 12, because I think it'd be fun to listen to what Ezra comes up with as well. So
let's do that.
From a critical academic perspective, the golden calf story in Exodus 32 and Deuteronomy 9 is widely seen as a later polemical retelling of the calf worship established by Jeroboam first in 1 Kings 12. The reasoning behind this view comes from literary, historical, and theological analysis. Jeroboam's golden calves, set up at Bethel and Dan, are presented as an alternative worship system to the Jerusalem temple. The language in 1 Kings 12 closely parallels that of Exodus 32, particularly the declaration, "These are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt." This has led many scholars to argue that the Exodus account is a later Deuteronomistic critique of Northern Israelite worship. In other words, after the fall of the Northern Kingdom, 722 BCE, Southern scribes reshaped history to condemn the rival cult centers by linking them to a moment of national apostasy at Sinai. Further evidence comes from textual layers within the Torah. The Elohist source, which is often associated with the Northern Kingdom, contains the golden calf episode, while the Deuteronomistic historian expands on it in Deuteronomy 9 as part of a broader critique. Scholars argue that this suggests the story was shaped after Jeroboam's time, reflecting a Southern perspective that sought to delegitimize Northern practices. So, historically speaking, Jeroboam's calves likely came first, and the Exodus-Deuteronomy story was later crafted to serve as a theological and political polemic against Northern Israel.
Right, so I would agree with Ezra, but I would say it slightly differently. I think the Jeroboam story came first, but that the Aaron embellishment came later, because I don't see that the Moses scroll is taking from either of these stories because it's so minimalist. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think it has to. I don't think it has to.
Yeah, that's quite right.
Yeah. One other point, though, just to bring this in, scholars argue that this suggests the story was shaped after Jeroboam's time, reflecting a Southern perspective that sought to delegitimize Northern practice. Let me tell you what time I think that was. And it's in the next chapter. It's in the very next chapter. It is a later...
2 Kings 13?
No, 1 Kings 13. Yeah, 1 Kings 13, right?
1 Kings 13, yeah.
Is it 1 Kings 13 or is it?
No, you're probably right. Yeah.
Okay. So here's the interesting thing. Let me go here because this is quite interesting. Now this is in context. 1 Kings 12 is about the two, the calves being set up and so forth. Chapter 13, verse 1. He ascended the altar to present an offering. A man of God, unnamed, arrived at Bethel from Judah at the command of the Lord. While Jeroboam was standing on the altar to present the offering, the man of God, at the command of the Lord, cried out against the altar, "O altar, altar! Thus says the Lord, a son shall be born to the house of David, Josiah by name, and he shall slaughter upon the priests of the shrines who bring offerings upon you." And it goes on and on. Now, this story, by the way, of this actually happening is in 2 Kings 23, 15, and 16. But the interesting thing is this. Yeah. It's like if a Southern, during the time of Josiah, the reshaping that many scholars see is tied to this verse. To them, it would be a dead giveaway. You're like, when was this written? Was it a prediction 300-400 years prior to Josiah? Or is it in Josiah's day and Josiah's men are giving a reason for them destroying the altars and they say, look, we've got this text. That's just the idea, is that it's being reshaped. Because remember, in Josiah's time, and the Torah would be edited at that time too, and let me tell you why. Jeremiah and Zephaniah are the only two prophets at the time of Josiah that we have mentioned by name other than Huldah the prophetess. Quickly, Jeremiah 8:8 saw something in his day. He said that the Torah, who are we to say that we are wise and the Torah of the Lord is with us when the lying pen of the scribes made it a lie? And Zephaniah chapter 3 and verse 4 says that the priest did violence to the Torah. Those are the only two prophets. Kings and Chronicles says there's this great revival going on. Prophets don't know anything about it. So I just think it could be that these are hints that the editing took place in the days of Josiah, and that's why we got that.
So speaking of other hints, Ross, and Ezra touched on some of them as well, but I'll just throw in a few more for good measure. And chapter 32, verse 1 says, when the people saw that Moses... Now, it's funny because the Jewish Study Bible wants to fix this, right? It says, when the people saw that Moses was hoping in coming... was long in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said, come, make us a god who shall go before us. But actually, Ross, what it says is, come make us gods, plural, right? Throughout the whole narrative in chapter 32, the Jewish Study Bible wants to present it as singular, and there's a reason for that. But you in your Torah tablet, I think, has it plural and more correctly there. And it's not just in chapter 32, verse 1, it's chapter 32, verse 4. The narrator has the people exclaiming after Aaron, takes the earrings and throws them in the fire and fashions it into a singular molten calf. The people exclaim, "These are your gods." Well, who are these? Is it Aaron and the calf? I mean, who are these? But the narrator goes further in chapter 32, verse 8, putting that phrase in the mouth of Jehovah, because Jehovah says to Moses, you better get on down, because the people have made themselves have fallen into idolatry, saying, "These are your gods, O Israel." And it's interesting in Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 12. That phrase is absent when God says to Moses, "You better get on down," because they're making a calf of themselves. It doesn't say these are your gods, but it makes sense that Jeroboam would, because apparently he made one for Bethel and he made one for Dan, and he said to the people, "Behold your gods," and it seems to be written into the text there.
Let me support your point. Let me support your point here. In the Hebrew, if someone looks at this, because I can imagine a lot of our viewers are very well versed in the Bible, they could say, well, if God's is Elohim, then maybe it means God, because sometimes Elohim is used singular for the God. In fact, in the Moses scroll, for the God of heaven, if you will. Or how do we know whether it's singular or plural? And the thing that you didn't say, Jono, but I know you looked at, is that the verbs are of these gods who shall go before us. It's plural. Right. They will go before us. I just wanted to bring that up.
Thanks for bringing that up, because I had to check that with Alistair, because all of the translations were in the plural, and you're talking about 1 Kings chapter 12. But it says, behold Eloheka, right? Behold your God. If you isolated that, it would say that. But then the following verb, as you say, is in the plural, and that's the reason why.
Well, in Exodus 32, Exodus 32 is plural as well. Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
Sorry,
all the way through, and so it is the plural reading of the Jeroboam passage is echoed in the Aaron passage, and if this is the case, Ross, if this is correct, it indicates a much later fabrication and elaboration of the original story at Horeb. Now, speaking of Horeb, by the way. It is Psalm 106, verses 19 and 20, which mentions the golden calf incident and speaks of a calf in the singular, but mentions it as having occurred at Horeb, and it doesn't implicate Aaron. It seems to be citing an earlier, less elaborated account, which is interesting. Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 18 also quotes that phrase, but says, "This is your God." It quotes it in the singular, interestingly. But as I was doing the research on this, it did come to it would seem quite clear that most scholars agree that the Jeroboam story is late and heavily anachronistic, and that the Aaron story is later, appropriating the incrimination of the Jeroboam narrative. What else on this? Chapter 9, verse 20. Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 20. Let me go back. I know we just read that, but because you were pointing that out. But
I think it's not only an insert, but that after you do this, I'll give the one other passage that mentions Aaron in Deuteronomy. I think it'd be a surprise for people.
And it is it's obviously deriving most of this from the Moses scroll. It elaborates a little bit here and there with a few extra words. It says in verse 17, "Whereupon I gripped the two tablets and I flung them away from my hands, smashing them before your eyes." So it's a little bit more colorful. "I threw myself down before the Lord, eating no bread and drinking no." It doesn't say that in the Moses scroll that he didn't drink or eat. But 40 days and 40 nights is there because of the great wrong that you had committed in what was displeasing to Jehovah and vexing him. Verse 19, "For I was in dread of the Lord's fierce anger against you, which moved him to wipe you out. And at that time, too, the Lord gave me heed." Verse 20, "Moreover, the Lord was angry enough with Aaron to have destroyed him, so I interceded for him also at that time." As for that sin, verse 21, that sinful thing that you made, the calf, I took it and I put it to the fire, Ross. I broke it into bits and I ground it thoroughly until it was fine dust. And I threw its dust into the brook that comes down from the mountain. What did you just read? Where were we? First Kings. Where is? Oh no, that's right. You were saying that in Second Kings, it is Josiah that does that. And what we have here is an almost identical phrase, which is used in both passages, which is another similarity. The grinding of dust, and it appears in both of these where golden calves are spoken about. So it seems
to your point, to your point, it's only there. Richard Elliott Friedman points out that this is clearly Deuteronomic. In other words, it's the writer in the days of Josiah. Remember the scroll that's found in Josiah's days. Josiah is doing his reform to match what is required of him in this Deuteronomic law code. So it's the story, the verbs, it says you beat this to dust. Oh, well, that's what Moses did. He beat it to dust. You see all sorts of parallels between 2 Kings 22-23, 2 Chronicles 34-35, and what we find in Deuteronomy. And there is good reason for that. Very good reason for it.
There is. Let me give you one more, and it's one that we already touched on briefly, but the introduction to Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, right? It's curious to me that, now this is attributed to E. I think this is the E source that gives us that. And remember, Jeroboam's sons are Nadab and Abiyah, right? I remember, Ross, the Torah lacks Yahwistic theophoric names, right? We don't have Yahu at the end of any name. So you can't just take Jeroboam's son, Abiyah, and just drop him into the Torah without any suspicion. So he becomes perhaps Nadab and Abihu instead. Well, if the purpose of their inclusion is to further associate Jeroboam with the sin of, or further associate Aaron with the sin of Jeroboam, one may ask, where are the descendants of Nadab and Abihu? Where are they? Who are their descendants today? Because that would be, so it's no wonder that P, right, has them killed in very strange circumstances in Leviticus chapter 10, verse 1. Everyone will remember that story, and we'll get to that eventually, where they bring strange fire and God just strikes them down with, and I think barbecues them, Ross, if I remember correctly.
It's a bad deal. It's a
bad deal. It's cruel, it's unusual, and it's just out of the blue. And then, of course, First Chronicles chapter 24, verses 1-2 tells us they had no sons. They didn't have any sons. We don't have descendants.
Oh, so wait a minute. So now it ties all together. So in the Chronicles, in this genealogy, it just says that they didn't have any kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
that's it.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
So you can drop them in and then pull them out again. That job is done. Now, furthermore, we've spoken about this as well, but in 32, and this is where the Levites become the special ones, right? Because in 32,
speaking of killing children, is that what you're going into? Okay.
Well, verse 27-29, kill your brothers. Go for it. It says, go and kill your brothers. So the Levites strap it, because Moses comes down and says, who's on the Lord's side, Jehovah's side? And Levites are like, yep, I'll do that. Okay, very good. Get your swords and go and kill, And so they go through, and it says that they killed their brothers, about 3,000. But it flies in the face of the commandment as it appears in the Moses scroll that says, you shall not kill the soul of your brother. The qualifier is missing from the canonical text, Deuteronomy 5 and Exodus 20, but that's what it says in the Moses scroll. No wonder it was extracted, if you like, because this narrative is important to the priestly class. Ross?
Now, some people would say there's a difference in the word for kill and murder, but in the Hebrew, there is not. In the Hebrew, the commandment. Now, look, people can get in all sorts of debate. Well, it means intentional versus. I'm not even weighing into that. I'm just saying, as far as the language is concerned, the word where it says, you shall not kill your brother, the soul of your brother, that verb is a word that it's not a special word that carries in and of itself the idea of murder. Context might. in certain cases, but I just wanted to line that out. Now, let me say one thing. This idea of Moses telling Aaron, passing along the message to go through the camp and take all these bad people out, that's missing in Deuteronomy altogether, and it's interesting where it is missing in context. Can we jump to that just for a moment?
Please.
Look
Absolutely.
at Deuteronomy chapter 10, and Deuteronomy 10 is where Moses is told to make an ark. Remember, this isn't the Spirit-filled artisans. This is a different ark. Moses is going to make the ark, the box, and so forth. And then it says, verse 5, 10:5, Deuteronomy, "Then I left and went down from the mountain, and I deposited the tablets in the ark that I had made, which they still are," where they still are, "as the Lord had commanded me." All right, and then it says, "From Berot Beni Yakan, the Israelites marched to Mosera. Aaron died there, was buried there, and his son Eleazar became priest in his stead. From there they marched to Gudgod, and from Gudgod to Jatba, a region of running brooks. At that time the Lord set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of the Lord's covenant, to stand in attendance upon the Lord, to bless his name, as is still the case." This is why, Jono, the Levites have received no hereditary portion along with their kinsmen.
Ross.
That's why. Not that
you remember we talked about
3,
this last week, right? So we needed one of the narratives that was needed to smooth this over. If actually Levi is not a tribe, we talked about how there were two conflicting lists, one of 12 tribes, one including Levi and Joseph, the other including Manasseh and Ephraim. If the Levites, as they appear in the Moses scroll, are those that accompany Israel, those who are joined to Israel, perhaps like the man with an Egyptian father and a mother of Dan that we read about a little later, I think, in Numbers. If they are the Levites, then and they seem to over time have morphed into a priestly status, and they want to adopt the idea of having been a tribe all along. How do you do that when they own no land? They haven't inherited land. Well, you create a narrative that explains why they're very, very special, and in fact, and this is the text that you're referring to here. And this is the reason
one thing I didn't say yet. One thing I didn't say yet is the difference in Deuteronomy and the rest of the priestly literature. Deuteronomy never refers to the sons of Aaron. It never refers. It refers to the priest, the Levites. HaKohanim, HaLeviim, the priests, the Levites. Okay, now furthermore, Aaron is only mentioned in two texts in Deuteronomy. One we read just a moment ago in Deuteronomy 9:20, and here in the text that I read, but notice what it says. He died at Moserah. That's not where Aaron died, not according to the priestly text. In 3 other places in the Torah, it says that he dies at Mount Hor. So this is clearly, now just one more point about this. This is clearly an insertion into a Deuteronomic text which did not know Aaron. Let me prove it. Look at verse 5 again, 10:5. "I left and went down the mountain, and I deposited the tablets in the ark that I had made, where they still are, as the Lord had commanded me. I had stayed on the mountain as I did the first time, 40 days and 40 nights. And the Lord heeded." You see that? I skipped down to verse 10. I skipped the obvious parenthetical insertion that dealt with some travel, which, by the way, doesn't match anything else we have. Nothing in the Torah says that Aaron died at Moserah. It says Mount Hor, Mount Hor, Mount Hor, Mount Hor. And then all of a sudden, so this is a later insertion when the writer doesn't know where Aaron died. All he knows is he's got to inject Aaron into the story, just like he did in the previous chapter. 2 times, both of them are out of place. Clearly, Aaron is a later insertion into the story. At least it appears to be so.
Yeah. Grand. Excellent. I think we have done very well with the golden calf, but we had to dig deep into that one, Ross. We really did. And to be honest with you, when I first started getting into this for Ki Tissa, I was kicking myself that I haven't done such a deep dive into the golden calf incident before, because it is so relevant when trying to figure out which one came first and and of course it's mentioned in the Moses scroll and so on and so forth. So I'm really glad that we did that.
Me too.
32 verse 31. Again, it mentions, by the way, as it's signing out of this whole theme, 32:31 says, gods of gold. Where is it here? Here we go.
You're right, 32:31.
Yeah. Well, I know, but here, of course, in the Jewish Study Bible, it says they making themselves a god of gold. It's still in the singular, but it is actually in the plural. Now, if you'll forgive that sin, Moses is made to say, well and good, but if not, erase me from the record which you have written. The scroll which God has written. What is this, Ross? What are your thoughts?
I tell you, it's very interesting and mystical, but it seems to be something we're not familiar with. But Moses, according to the priestly writer, knows that there's some book, and he's almost saying, out of protest, if you don't forgive this people, then just take me out of the book altogether. I don't want any part in this.
And so Jehovah said to Moses, he who has sinned against me, him only, Ross, will I erase from my record. And it makes me wonder, well, is that him only, Aaron? Is that the reference here? I wonder, because who else are we going to point the finger at?
Oh, alluding to Aaron. Okay, I got you.
I think so. Go now, he continues, lead the people where I told you. See, my angel shall go before you. So now Jehovah palms Israel off to the angel, and we have all of that. 33 verse 2, again, the Girgashites are missing from the list. We only have 6, where Deuteronomy chapter 7 has 7, the Girgashites. 33
verse 2. Yeah, 2 already has there's the angel again.
We got the angel. Yeah, it's very angel-y now. But then we go to, we got the stiff-necked people. Did you want to make a comment on that?
Just to the point, in fact, I have a note in the Moses scroll about stiff-necked people I won't go into, but it's in the text, because that phrase, it literally, a people of a hard neck, is the way that it's used in the Hebrew Bible as well as the Moses scroll. That phrase is the same. And what we see is, in this particular section, we see them called a stiff-necked people quite a few times. So I've got it, let's see, I've got it in chapter 32, verse 9, chapter 34, verse 9. I think I found it in 4 different texts in this Torah portion about the stiff-necked people. But just a phrase that has stuck over time, and people still use it sort of as a pejorative.
And then it says in verse 6, Israel remained stripped off the finery from Mount Horeb on. So we have Mount Horeb again, whereas, we
skipped a Moses scroll reference right above there in verse 5.
Oh, my goodness. Go ahead.
Yep. I shall consume thee. It says, if I go up into the midst of thee for one moment, I shall consume thee. Therefore, now put off thy ornaments. Consume in a moment. That Hebrew phrase is actually in the Moses scroll. Let me look at that. I've got it marked here. If you have the Moses scroll, go to page 167 and look at footnote 487, where I say, the destruction of Israel in a moment, Resh Gimel Ayin, is threatened elsewhere in the Bible. See Exodus 33:5, Numbers 16:21, and verse 45 of chapter 16 in Numbers. So it just happens to be, and here's the reading. That particular passage is 487 is GB 8 through 10. Yeah.
Elohim said to me that he intended. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, we'll start in GB 9. And Elohim said to me that he intended to destroy you, but I interceded, standing on your behalf in the mount 40 days and 40 nights on your behalf. And Elohim hearkened also that time and did not destroy you in a moment. And that's the phrase we see here. All right?
Yeah, that's right. And then it goes on to, this part is referenced in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 15. It's not because of your righteousness that Elohim is giving you power to do so mightily, but because Elohim attached with your fathers to love them. He chose their seed after all the people. So then we have, getting back to there's so much overlay with Deuteronomy. and back and forth.
Oh, yeah.
Tent of meeting, 33 verses 7 and 8, Ross. The tent of meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, we touched on this last week. There are 2 tents of meeting. One of those tents of meeting is the tabernacle, central to the camp. And this tent of meeting is outside the camp. It's the one that Joshua hangs out in and so forth. In fact, a friend of ours, Daniel Wright, sent me an article that popped up in his feed this week from the Torah.com. We'll post that in the comments. So, but there are 2 tents, the 2 tents of meeting. The Hebrew is the same, Ohel Moed, but this tent is the tent where Moses has a personal meeting with God from time to time, and the other tent is the more priestly tent of meeting that we're familiar with when we talk about the Mishkan, the Mikdash, the tabernacle, if you will.
2 tents, 2 arks. So speaking with God in the column of smoke face to face, so it reminds me, I just have to say, it reminds me of the, you remember the Wizard of Oz? When they finally get to speak to the great and powerful Wizard of Oz, and he's like this big, fat-headed face in the smoke that is billowing up and supposed to be all scary and impressive and all that stuff until Toto pulls the curtain back and reveals, who's actually pulling the strings. Yeah. But it seems to me that it's clearly borrowing from this imagery. And but it's interesting, isn't it? Because then in 33:20 it says, you cannot see my face and live.
Yeah. Well, there's a tension in the text. This is one of those tensions in the text. In fact, between Deuteronomy and Exodus. Deuteronomy, you didn't see anything. You didn't see anything. Over and over and over, the text says you didn't see anything. Exodus, in Exodus 24, and they saw the God of Israel, and they did eat and drink. They saw God. They saw God. So there's a tension in the text in Exodus, and a lot of times the priestly writer not only has the visionary element, but this idea of anthropomorphic references to God that you just don't see in Deuteronomy. In fact, where you mention that, it's always the forbidding thereof. Don't make, don't represent, you didn't see it, don't try to represent it.
Now, speaking of difficult text here, it says in verse 11, God would speak to Moses face to face. As one man speaks to another, he would then return to the camp, but his attendant Joshua, the son of Nun, a youth, would not stir out of the tent. Richard Elliott Friedman has a note on that. Here in E, Joshua is pictured as being inside the tent of meeting, but this is in contradiction of P, where it is forbidden for anyone who is not a priest ever to be in the tent, the penalty of which is to be put to death, Ross.
Well, it's a different tent, I tell you.
That's the solution?
Yeah, Richard Elliott Friedman told a joke one time. I got to do it. I wasn't going to do it, but I have to do it quickly. Moses goes into a psychiatrist, and he reclines on the couch, and he says, I had this dream. And he said, in the first dream, I was a Mishkan. And he said, you were the Mishkan? He said, yep. And he said, in the second dream, the next night, I dreamed that I was the Ohel Moed. And the psychiatrist said, well, okay, here's the problem. You're too tense. All right, sorry. Go ahead. Hey, but look, when you're ready to go to Exodus 34, we're gonna bring in Ezra. I bet Ezra's just rolling on the floor right now.
All right, come on, let's do it.
So let me bring
34.
Ezra in because I want to ask Ezra, in chapter 34, it appears that we have yet another version of the 10 words. So maybe to set the stage, Ezra, can you tell us a little bit about Exodus 34 and another version of the 10 words?
Yes. Exodus 34 is often seen as an alternative version of the 10 words, one that focuses more on ritual obligations rather than moral or legal commands. Scholars have noted that this section, sometimes called the ritual decalogue, differs significantly from the more well-known versions in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. From a critical perspective, Exodus 34 seems to stem from priestly or cultic traditions, emphasizing proper worship, sacrifices, festivals, and covenantal obligations. Unlike the ethical decalogue in Exodus 20, which focuses on broader moral imperatives, e.g., not murdering, stealing, or bearing false witness, This version reinforces Israel's distinct religious practices, including prohibitions against idolatry, keeping the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and firstborn consecration. Many scholars argue that these differences suggest that multiple traditions of the 10 words existed in ancient Israel, and later redactors wove them together, sometimes creating tensions in the text. Exodus 34 may represent an older priestly tradition that sought to establish worship practices as the core of the covenant rather than moral laws alone. This would align with a historical shift towards centralized worship, likely during the reforms of Josiah, 7th century BCE, or earlier priestly developments. So, Exodus 34 isn't just a repeat of the Decalogue. It's a theological statement emphasizing cultic fidelity over ethical imperatives, reflecting a different strand of Israelite religious thought.
So, and it's remarkable the way that it finishes too. This whole delivering of another version of the 10, because even though in what was it 31:18? Yeah, when he finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, he gave Moses the 2 tablets of the pact, stone tablets inscribed with the finger of God. And we have the golden calf and smash the tablets and all this. And then in 28, and he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He ate no bread, drank no water. He wrote down, wrote down on the tablets the terms of the covenant, the 10 commandments, Ross.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If you look at 34, it begins, hew thee 2 tables of stone like the first. I'm going to write on these the words of the first tables. And then it goes into these very now some of these you could almost, if you squint, Jono, if you kind of look at them through just very, very tight eyes, you could see, that's similar to what we find in the 10 Commandments. There's some correlation, there's some overlap. Mm-hmm. But when it comes down to it, these really are totally different. And we'll come back and pick up some of this if we have to. But again, it mentions not only different commands, but their festivals and so forth. But then, as you point out at the very end, I'm confused as to who wrote these. And the other point is that this is one of the 3 references in the Pentateuch to the English is generally translated 10 commandments, whereas the Hebrew is the 10 words. So what are these words? Because he says, with these words, look at verse 27, the tenor of these words, I made a covenant with you. These words, these are not the words that you made a covenant with them. These are not the words that were written on the first tab. If you read this in context, the reader is going to be confused. There's no way around this. This text clearly does not know the 10 words from Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. It clearly doesn't. It's a different set altogether.
And it's curious because, like 27, and the Lord said to Moses, Jehovah said to Moses, write down these commandments. He's like saying to him, you write them down. Write down the commandments in accordance with these commandments. I make a covenant with you and with Israel. And he was there, we assume Moses, with Jehovah 40 days, 40 nights, ate no bread, no drink, no water. And he wrote down what Moses wrote down. So there is this confusion, not just of the 10 words, but who wrote them down. Now, just remind me, Ross, we have Exodus chapter 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5, which don't perfectly agree. There's some significant differences between those 2 accounts. Remarkable difference between those 2 and this account here in chapter 34, and remarkable difference again in Leviticus's version of the 10 words, which is chapter 19. Is there, so that's 4 attempts to recall the 10 words. Is there another one?
Well, the only other that we have, obviously we have the different texts that we went through in our series on the 10 words, the various Samaritan Pentateuch, the various documents from Qumran, the Shapira manuscript. But we do have some text in the prophets, and we also have some text in the Christian New Testament where there are attempts to remember. But quite often, they're looking at these other texts as well, primarily Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. So it is very curious. This text is just so different. Now, there's one other thing in chapter 34, just to touch on it, because it is used by the biblical writers probably more frequently than anything else in the Bible. and that is a J text in in Exodus 34, beginning in verse 5. And Jehovah descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of Jehovah. Jehovah passed by before him and proclaimed, Jehovah, Jehovah, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness and truth, keeping loving kindness for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity, this translation says, of the fathers upon the children and upon the children's children, third and fourth generation. That text, without going into a lot of detail on the details of it, is found in Numbers 14:18, Psalm 86, verse 15, Psalm 103:8, Psalm 111:4, Psalm 112:4, Psalm 116:5, Psalm 145:8, Nehemiah 9:17, 2 Chronicles 30, verse 9, and Joel 2, verse 13, to name the ones that I knew from my study notes. So there may even be more. But that's quite often that at least, not always all, but a good portion of that text is repeated in all those texts.
Mm-hmm. Quite
what
right.
else you got in 34, Jono?
Well, I'm about to lose my voice, so I'm going to jump right to verse 29. So Moses came down from Mount Sinai, and as Moses came down from the mountain, Ross, bearing the 2 tablets of the pact, Moses was not aware, didn't know, that the skin of his face was radiant, since he had spoken with him. Aaron and all the Israelites saw the skin of Moses' face, that it was radiant, and they shrank from coming near him. But Moses like, what's the problem? Have I got something in my beard? What's going on? But he's Moses McShiny Face. But that's not the only translation. There's other translations that say that he was. Well, what does it say in your Torah tablet?
Let me look. Yeah, I don't know that. I think this is where they get the idea that he had the old shiny face, though, isn't it? Let's see. What verse is it again?
Chapter 35, verse 29. Verse 29.
Okay, yeah, here we go. When he came down from the mount, that Moses knew not that the skin of his face shone by reason of his speaking with him. So his face shone. It says that again in verse 30.
There we go.
Yeah,
we do have different translations, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but don't some of them say that he was horned?
Yeah, it's actually a misunderstanding of the text, but the idea is that there are these beams of, he's like this radiant, he's shining, these beams are coming forth, and some mistook through various translations the idea that he had, instead of beams of light, that he had horns on his head. So this is where this idea comes from. So
much so, though, Ross, that medieval art often depicts Moses as having horns.
You got it.
Remarkable, isn't it?
Horned Moses.
There you go.
What else, man?
Right.
I tell you, this is a jam-packed lesson. Is there anything else you could possibly add to this?
All I'm going to say is that they put a veil over his face because it was too scary. It's like, Moses, you're just too weird now. We don't even want to look at you because you're freaking us out. Just put this veil over your head, dude. Will you please?
And interestingly enough, we never see anything else about him wearing a veil over his face.
That's right. And of course, this whole section is added. It's not in the Moses scroll whatsoever. It's not in Deuteronomy. And that brings us to Vayachel, and that is going to be next week. Hopefully my voice will be back by then. I'm sure it will be. But I think that's it. Ross, is there anything else that you want to throw into the mix before we go?
Man, look, everybody pray for Jono, and we'll just, hopefully you'll feel much better next week, and we will be ready to go with Vayachel. Another good lesson in Torah Pearls.
Ezra, take us on out.
That's all for this episode of Torah Pearls. We've unpacked the drama of Ki Tissa, from the molten calf to Moses' shattered tablets, and even that fascinating debate over the ritual Decalogue in Exodus 34. As always, the text gives us more questions than answers, but that's what makes the journey so rich. If you enjoyed the discussion, don't forget to share Torah Pearls with fellow Bible enthusiasts. Keep studying, Keep questioning, and we'll see you next time as we dive into the next portion. Shalom.